So as you can see, I am a librarian for the museum. I use she, her pronouns, so you're welcome to address me as such. I'm an avid fantasy novel reader and have been for a very long time. I much prefer fiction to nonfiction. That's just who I am. And I've been an active D&D player for about the past 2 years. So I wouldn't say that I'm a professional D&D player or know everything there is to know about it. I'm sure there are some of you here who have been playing much longer than I have. And I will also say that I'm not an archaeologist. So I'm not a professional in either of these realms, though I have some experience playing D&D and I have experience working in an archaeology lab and being surrounded by archaeologists. So that's kind of my stat block. And I encourage all of you, if you haven't done this before, to take the character creation for Dungeons and Dragons and try and fit yourself into it. So this is my attempt at figuring out who Kelsey Grimm would be in the world of Dungeons and Dragons. And I came up with a wizard of the divination class, background sage, and you can see the rest of my stats there. It's really fun. I will mention that I would like this to be a conversation. So I know not everybody is available to turn on their video and chat or comfortable. We are recording, so keep that in mind. But there will be a couple of times where I ask for your input. And so I'd like for you to use the chat function if you can, when we get there, to ask your questions, to interact with me. This isn't me standing up here telling you, sitting up here, telling you exactly what's what. So I want you to be a part of this. I want us to talk and think things through, okay? So Dungeons and Dragons, I am coming from a framework of the 5th edition. So I will mention that. How many of you can speak up, raise your hand, or indicate in some other way, how many of you have actually played Dungeons and Dragons before? Yeah, quite a few people. Cool, all right, great. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Dungeons and Dragons or D&D, D&D is a high fantasy tabletop role-playing game. And we use tabletop now because there are video games, role-playing games in the video game realm. And this is more of a live people-to-people interaction. When we don't have COVID, you would be in the same room with each other. But nowadays you can still do D&D online. And I've been doing that for the past year. It was first published in 1974. It is a shared storytelling experience led by a dungeon master or DM who serves as the game's referee and main storyteller. The characters form a party, the people you're playing with, and interact with the setting and the world's inhabitants to solve dilemmas, engage in battles, explore the world, and gather treasures and knowledge. And we'll get to that in a little bit. So characters earn experience points over time in order to rise in levels and abilities. So that's a basis for us all to start with Dungeons and Dragons. I will mention that being high fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons is derived from Lord of the Rings and other high fantasy culture. And we'll specifically be talking about that in a little bit. But this is the framework from which I'm working. Not to say that those of you who have played other editions of Dungeons and Dragons, you may have a different experience, but I'm pulling from the 5th edition. All right, this is where we get some interaction. What is archaeology or anthropology? And I already know that we have some archaeologists and anthropologists in the room with us. So go ahead and use the chat function, or you're welcome to unmute yourself and tell me what you think archaeology or anthropology might be.
Two of the most important things in playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay, important to playing Dungeons and Dragons. Why do you say that?
Well, at base, a party of adventurers is seeking relics, treasure, lost civilizations, buried ruins, and trying to understand the people that built them or inhabit them now or haunt them, which lays heavily into both disciplines.
Yeah, I agree with that. We have Allison in the chat says anthropology is study of human and culture. I agree with that. Jay Vanderveen, archaeology is a great and interesting academic field if you aren't interested in getting a job. Well, you know.
True that.
Anybody else have a guess before I, or you know, what your impression of archaeology or anthropology may be? Christina, the study of people and the cultures they create to deal with everyday challenges. Okay, so we're kind of circling around this idea, archaeology in the past, anthropology is today. Okay, that's an interesting interpretation too. Archaeology, the study of historical artifacts. Okay, so related to history, I totally agree with this. Yeah. So the definitions that I've come up with, that I've found, anthropology, we'll start with first, is kind of the umbrella discipline, if you will. According to the IU Department of Anthropology's website, it says anthropology explores what it means to be human. We understand human behavior by studying and comparing both biology and culture. So notice they separate biology or genetics maybe, and culture, which we'll talk about what culture is later as well, both in the past and present from local and global perspectives, as well as the mental and material. So then archaeology on the left-hand side of the screen is the study of the human past through material remains. So what do archaeologists do? They look at what has been left behind. Generally, it's found in the ground somewhere, whether intentionally left there or unintentionally, to understand past culture, people, what they did, how they lived, what they ate, what games they played, that kind of a thing. And then if we take a D&D slant to this, we're going to replace human with humanoid. And if you aren't familiar with D&D, we'll be talking about races and cultures, races and classes, I guess, a little bit later.
Wouldn't sentient be a better word than humanoid?
Sentient humanoid. Yeah, that actually in the D&D, the player's handbook, it does say intelligent humanoid races. So trying to think.
It's rather limited.
It's a little limiting, yeah. And dragons, yes, that's true. So beings, so in the D&D world, anthropology might be to explore what it means to be an intelligent being, an intelligent creature. Creature is kind of derivative. Feel free to jump in with anybody else if you're interested.
I think you should use the word sentience.
Sentience, intelligence, yeah.
Well, I don't know, no, not interchangeably. I think the nuance in sentience, if you're going to be talking about embracing a fantasy world with a multitude of cultures on various levels of sentience, then I believe sentience becomes the marker and therefore the most defining aspect of what you're going to study. Sentience. You're not going to study, well, some of you might study ants or beetles, but the study, if you're going to be in a fantasy world, you have to be familiar with all those cultures and norms to exist.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you make a horrible mistake and die.
Right. And I think in fantasy worlds, I think that this is something that a lot of people have been talking about, especially with Dungeons and Dragons. When we get to some of the races, there are different understandings of intelligence in those races, right? I would think that there's a stereotype, I think, to me, that elves may be more intelligent or than say orcs, or there's different intelligences. This is the fun thing about doing D&D though, I think, is that you can create your own world and you can change and you can think about what that means to be intelligent, to think about what it means to be a civilization, to think about what it means to be a society. And we can use archaeology and anthropology as frameworks to look at that or to play with. So archaeologists also may look at the world around them slightly differently than you and me, or me being a librarian. I look at the world a little different than somebody who has studied and looked at the natural world. Geologists look at things differently than I would, right? We all come from different. So the next activity that we're going to do is we're going to try and think like an archaeologist. Again, this is an active participation if you'd like to jump in. I'm going to show you different artistic representations of caves. And I want you to tell me what an archaeologist might look at or see or question or think about the space. Okay, so here's our first one. So we're in an icy cavern, it looks like. A shelter from weather, perhaps. A shelter from creatures, perhaps. What made the tracks and the footsteps? It looks as though there's a bridge in it, so maybe it wasn't always a cave. How did these hollow formations form in the ice? This is a great question, right? So is this naturally occurring? Was this created by an animal who burrowed through the earth and then has left behind this void? Was it man-made or human-made, right? Was there some sort of other creature who intentionally created this space? These are great questions. All right, let's go to the next one. Are those bones on the bottom right? I don't think so. I tried not to put remains in the pictures. I think that's just the artistic stylings of the vegetation in this cave. Oh, that's another question, right? What kinds of vegetation live in this cave? What climate are we in? Is this normal to see this much snow in this area? Perhaps, and then we start to throw magic into it, right? Is this a magical cave with snow in it for some reason? That's getting a little outside of archaeology, but. Here's our second cave. So I see a person who's standing there in the middle. The ground looks very flat, probably quarried or cut. It's a good observation. And maybe a little hard to see in the back there, there's kind of like holes in the rock wall. There's obviously holes in the ceiling that are letting sunlight in. Are those stalactites and stalagmites, or the columns that have joined, are those naturally occurring? Do you have permission to enter? Great question when we're thinking about Dungeons and Dragons. At what time of year does the light come in at that angle? Yeah, so these are, I'm trying to get you to think about when you're going on your quests in Dungeons and Dragons, archaeologists look at these things slightly different than any regular adventuring crew, right? Derek says the holes all seem quite high. Could this cave have been used by flying creatures? Yeah, great. when we're thinking about, let's go to the next cave. What about this one? Has a very Lord of the Rings vibe to me. Definitely not natural, looks man-made and carved, looks human-made, some sort of creature. What if I told you the title of this artistic piece that I found is called Dragon's Lair? Dragons, yep, Janine got that. What kind of infrastructure was necessary to move all that stone, and where did it go? Yeah, great questions. Who's using that stone? Is it being used? Definitely think about hobbits and dwarves, a la Tolkien, yep. What's causing that light? What do the carvings represent? Down at the bottom there where you see the person standing at the entrance, there's definitely some sort of carved aspect to that opening. The entrance definitely sends a message. It's not just an entrance, but a warning. That's a great observation. Does the original owner creator still live here, right? Stylized rock, stylized teeth of the rock, right? Yeah. So if we're thinking about in D&D, often a basic quest is to go to a nearby physical earthen cave, some space where there's treasure or an artifact located, right? Well, if it's that close to a civilization or a village or, you know, people, a group of people, why is the treasure still there, right? If everybody knows about the treasure, why is the treasure still there? You presuppose that the party is given visual aids instead of an oral explanation. According to this, you're right. I am giving you a visual aid to try and stimulate your thinking like an archaeologist. In regular gameplay, normal gameplay, it is the dungeon master who is providing the description of the place that you're in. And so the dungeon master then will give you specific details that may or may not be important. So think mystery novels, right? Or suspense novels, literature. You're given clues, but some of those clues may be red herrings, right? By the DM. Neil says there's traps, yeah. So if you go to a cave, say this cave is nearby a village or near enough traveling distance, and there's treasure in there or artifacts that you need to uncover, why hasn't anybody gone there before? Right, so that there are traps or the dragon may be living there. So these, right, yes, trying to get you to think of things. I will also say in this virtual world, when I've been playing D&D online, virtually with friends, we have been using visual aids like this. The ability for Zoom or Discord or things like that has given us the ability to utilize visual aids a little more. Much like real life, these structures could have been made earlier. New creatures or humanoids could then reuse them, sometimes many, yes, later, and losing some of the original history. Yes, yeah, definitely. All right, last cave. Is the statue religious in nature? Potential ancient heroes? Place of worship? Or just a workshop? Something big happened here. Those statues were presumably once not submerged. Ancient villains? Is the water intentional or was it flooded? It looks like statues, some kind of deity, heroes, something idolized. Right, yeah, these are great, great observations. So one of the things that I'm hoping that you'll start to think about, whether you're just a player or a DM in your own campaigns, is how underground spaces are constructed and created. What uses are they? Are they natural and humanoids have come along to live in them, or has some giant burrowing creature created these cavernous spaces for us to use? Has something been buried over time? These are things that archaeologists use clues to try and uncover. One of the great uses, I think, of archaeology and archaeological material in video games or stories of any kind is it creates a history to the world you're living in. It makes you think about who was here before. The land has been used before. There's a sense of history that's used or created, I guess. We can't go by without thinking about archaeology in the public realm, in pop culture. These are just some examples of archaeology in pop culture that I've found, for good or bad, a lot for bad, I think. I do want to mention and point out there at the bottom, Heaven's Vault is a video game about archaeology that has been really heavily loved, I guess, by archaeologists in the field. So I will point that out to you if you're interested in that. Some of these other representations, as you can see, Indiana Jones there, Lara Croft. What kinds of things are these people known for in pop culture? Generally, I think it's a sense of looting, right? Yep, exactly, treasure hunting, fighting, being sexy, right? Most D&D parties definitely subscribe to the Indiana Jones School of Archaeology, get the treasure, avoid the traps, potentially sell it for high amounts of coin, right? You need to fund your adventures. How else are you going to do that, right? There's not a sense of ethics. Liz, were you going to say something?
No, sorry.
Okay. But also I wanted to point out this pop culture because it has shaped our understanding, the general population's understanding of what archaeology is and who archaeologists are and what they do. Stereotypes are a big thing. Allison says, one of my campaigns was notoriously bad at looting and instead more interested in storyline and NPCs. So, I wouldn't necessarily call most of these stories historically accurate. Is historical accuracy important in video games or role-playing games? What about, I mean, stereotypes are here for a reason, for good and for bad. Maybe getting away from some of these stereotypes could be an option. Narrative needs to be internally consistent. I agree with that. Depends on the players. Consistency of story is more important. We're not playing D&D to play through real history, right? Yeah, these are all great comments, and I don't have a correct answer for you. I'm just trying to get you to think of things, right? I think it would be really cool, the next character that I create potentially, to be that person who's on that ethical high ground. Maybe. This is a homebrewed meme. In general, tabletop RPGs depend on in-game archaeology for history, right? To create a sense of time in the world that you're in. But it also encourages the pursuit of fame, glory, and riches over ethical considerations. Most adventures are filled with ancient sites to explore, lost treasure to recover, and lore tied to fantasy landscapes and cultures. However, I'm just going to posit this for you. Perhaps some of our adventures, instead of retrieving and selling things, could be to work with the races as archaeologists or scientists of some kind to uncover their lost material culture. Perhaps instead of trying to sell the loot and artifacts, you could donate them to a museum or university or monastery for research. And ultimately, the big one here, perhaps we can return the stolen artifacts from museums and return them to descendant groups. I think these are great storylines. And I think that's the great thing about D&D is the homebrewed content, right? Within this realm, people are bringing to it their own life experiences and thoughts and ethical considerations. When I did this 2 years ago at the public library, we had a really wide range of ages. And the public library has a great D&D group for teens. And so some of the teens were there and they were specifically talking about how they can diversify and how they can turn tropes on their head. And I think that's just so fantastic. And that's something that I'm trying to do more in my storytelling as well, to not rely on tropes and stereotypes and to turn them on their head instead. For those of you who also know, this person on the right is Matthew Mercer. He runs a fairly popular Dungeons and Dragons YouTube channel, I guess. It's also on Twitch, I think, called Critical Role. And it's a bunch of voice actors who get together and play this game together. And it's pretty fun. So you could even do a game excavation instead of looting an area. Yes, exactly, Nick. So again, a lovely little meme that I found. There's the desire to create an authentic archaeological story, but there's the reliance on cheap and easy archaeological tropes. Which are you going to do? There is no right or wrong answer. This is a fantasy world. It's a story that you're creating. I'm just trying to think of ways of integrating modern archaeology thoughts into your D&D games. All right, here's another flash chat for you. What is culture and what is race? Culture, how we live in this world and how we do things in it. Culture is broader, includes all aspects of life. Culture is choices, rituals, external patterns of a group of people. Does anybody want to take a stab at what race is? And it's even the definition that I have here is controversial. We talk about in the museum categorization and classification. Libraries, archivists talk about this a lot, and the problems with categorizing and classifying things and people, right? Race is a social construct. That's true. That's absolutely true. Culture is the thoughts, ideals, and technology. Race is physical characteristics. It is a classification, like I said, and you mentioned. Race is a cultural group, typically based in a shared ethnicity. Race is a social construct that attempts to categorize people based on phenotypic characteristics. Yes, these are all great thoughts and ideas. Here's what I've come up with. According to the Society of American Archaeology, with my little D&D edit, culture is the shared body of acquired knowledge that beings live by and pass on to each generation. It encompasses the social behavior and norms found in societies, as well as the knowledge, beliefs, arts, laws, customs, capabilities, and habits of the individuals in these groups. So you're right, it's who we are, what we do, and why we do them, essentially, is culture. Race, a grouping of, and here I meant intelligent humanoids, was the wording in the player's handbook, based on shared physical or social qualities into categories generally viewed as distinct by society. So how does this matter in D&D? So I mentioned the Lord of the Rings trilogy earlier. As my husband likes to inform me, the Lord of the Rings is essentially, and Tolkien is the grandfather of fantasy. So Lord of the Rings was originally published in 1954 to 1955, slipping a little bit of bibliographic history in here for you. The Hobbit was published in 1937 prior to the Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings was written as a prequel to The Hobbit. Is that right? Sequel to The Hobbit, that's what I meant. But as most of you, this is all fairly common knowledge, Tolkien had been thinking about this story and this world since 1917, right around World War I. The story is heavily influenced by Christianity and European mythologies, in particular Beowulf, and by Tolkien being a straight white man in early 20th century England, right? So one of the great things when D&D was being created in 1971, like I said, it drew lots of influence from the Lord of the Rings series, so much so that the Tolkien Enterprises there was almost a lawsuit, a copyrightable action against D&D, which meant that the original terms Hobbit and Balrog had to be changed to Halfling and Balor, which Balor is a demon, a true demon in D&D, in the D&D realm. Early D&D played pretty fast and loose with copyright until they realized that authors aren't all that happy about people copying their ideas, right? But my point in all of this is a lot of this fantasy and folklore, right, as you point out, comes from, let's see if it comes up, a very particular part of the world, right? And this is something that I've been trying to learn more about myself, is expand my horizons. Not all folklore and stories come from that little circle on the map, right? This is a map from 1914, Japan, 1914. So it kind of recenters our thinking about the world and our visualization of the world, which is why I used it. So in D&D, talking about race, there on the left, you have a picture of the race page in the player's handbook, specifically. Sorry, I'm reading chat. Yes, the whole world has so many rich stories and myths and creatures. That's something I've been really getting into, is folklore creatures from all over the world. There's some great YouTube channels that introduce creatures from all over the world. Not that I'm saying you want to take another culture's creatures and make them monsters, right, to fight. And yeah, do you understand what I'm saying here? But okay, so race in D&D. This is the Player's Handbook, 5th edition. This is straight from it. Racial traits, according to 5th edition, are ability score increase. So depending on the race that you choose, different abilities such as intelligence or strength or investigation, right, can get a bonus. Age or longevity of the race is different. Alignment is sometimes different, being lawful, neutral, chaotic, good, evil, those things. Size, your body structure, body speed, the languages you know are based on race. And then there are sub-races, so differences between, say, hill dwarf and mountain dwarf. Excuse me. But one of the big problems that a lot of people have had with D&D is, are all of these racial traits actually truly biological traits? And the answer is no, right? We know this. Just because you are born, genetics do not equal culture, is what I'm trying to say. That race descriptions in the player's handbook, which are height and weight genetics, are also combined with cultural traits, such as weapons training, proficiencies with tools and things like that. So a real world example, being Italian doesn't mean that you're going to be good with cooking. You're going to have great cooking skills just because you're Italian, right? So there's a culture race dichotomy that's set up here. Is it okay? And generally in the past with 5th edition, the way characters and DMs have gotten around this is by homebrewing content and changing things, breaking the rules, but your DM has to be okay with that. I have 7 points in Italian. Most recent, yes, and we're getting there, John. Thanks for jumping in with that. So racial traits are not genetic traits, and that's something that a lot of people have had issue with for a very long time, playing D&D and other role-playing games. But as John mentioned in chat, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything was published in November of this past year, and it allows for more character flexibility when you're creating your character. So this is from page 7, directly from the book. Typical character race in D&D includes little or no choice, as we said. You're kind of stuck with what the rules state, unless your DM's willing to change things based on the origin story maybe that you come up with. But in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, character race in the game represents, you can change those assumptions. You can break those ideas and customize your ability scores and languages and proficiencies to fit the origin of the character that you create. So things are changing. People are listening to the community, right? They're listening to the community and things are changing. I wanted to mention, this is a great podcast and general resource of information. It's called Asians Represent. Daniel Kwan is the host of this show, and they talk about actual gameplay. They do critical read-throughs of RPG manuals, including a lot of the D&D content. And then they talk about the creation of culturally sensitive content. So as I mentioned before, a lot of D&D and high fantasy creation, so D&D, all of the video games and literature that has been derived from this world setting up, right, is very fixed in Euro-American folklore and thoughts and stories, right? With some exceptions, I'm not saying that, but racism also comes in with that, right? Colonialism is a part of that. And so Asians Represent is a group of people talking about changes to the gaming world in general. Have we talked about all the community-made content that massively changed mechanics to allow you to get out of the race issue? No, we haven't talked about that yet, but that's a great point. A lot of the ways in the past, if you wanted to change rule content, you have to go through community-made, you have to change things. It's homebrew content, right? But I wanted to show that there are official contents that are listening, that are trying to change, that are starting to become more diverse and allow for more options. I can't go by without also mentioning Archaeogaming, which is when I was trolling through Twitter on the archaeology lab account, I came across the hashtag Archaeogaming and I wondered what that was, right? And so Archaeogaming represents a variety of archaeology and gaming. On the left, you see Andrew Reinhardt is the one who came up with this. That's his webpage, the original webpage, where community members make blog posts about archaeology in video games, archaeology about video games. Here's another YouTube channel, Archaeo RPG, where it's a group of archaeologists who talk about RPG content. They also play games, and as archaeologists, they'll explain things. 5th edition Player's Guide went all in on trying to diversify characters in terms of gender and race for their illustrations, radically different from older editions. That's great to point out. I have not experienced other editions, so I'm glad that that's changing, right? Each subsequent edition seems to be allowing more people in, allowing more options for people, right? And D&D is a very open community, I've found, and I hope you have too. And having rules that reflect that, I think, is really great. So with Archaeogaming, I highly suggest this book. The IU system does not have it, but they do have it. The IU system has one copy of it, and the public library has a copy of it, which I've checked out and will be returning in the next couple of weeks. So if you'd like to check it out. But it does talk about archaeology within games, archaeology of video games, representations of archaeologists in games. So on the left here, video game archaeology. On the left is Christiana Krupa, who is a former IU grad student in archaeology, did actual archaeology, actual legitimate scientific documented archaeology in Elder Scrolls Online. It's fascinating. I think there's articles coming out about it. And this was a presentation last summer at Archaeogaming convention. It was an online convention. If you search Twitter with the hashtag ARGACON20, you'll be able to find some of that. And I think a lot of them streamed on Twitch if you want to see their presentations. And then on the right is the actual uncovering of video games. So the Atari ET video game, it's older than me, sorry. But they were buried in the desert, I believe, and there were a set of people uncovered them, right? It's so literally the archaeology of video games. You can also then talk about the digital realm, the burying of digital content, right? So Archaeogaming is multifaceted, and I highly suggest you looking into it. So now we're up to the open floor. Does anybody have any questions or comments? We're about 15 minutes early, but I wanted to save some time for people who had questions or comments or wanted to discuss more. I did have a couple questions about, like, how do people in societies attach value to things, right? What do we consider a treasure or an artifact? How does colonization and social hierarchies play into this, right? So there's a lot of questions that can be derived from all of this, but.
Kelsey, thank you for a really engaging presentation.
Oh, good.
And I'm really interested in what you said about changing the goals of one of these RPGs to accomplish something good, like repatriation or something. And I was wondering how you thought it sort of compared to the Afrofuturism movement, which I know that you've read books on. And I think that's been such an important movement for the Black community. So anyway, I was wondering if you could speak to that a little.
Yes, I think integrating those themes into role-playing can only make our stories better, right? It can only make the content that we create and experience and think about, right, better. I'm going blank on something. So Afrofuturism is something that I also suggest you look into if you don't know about it before. see if I can come up with a quick definition for those. Octavia Butler just hit the New York Times bestseller. Years ago, there was an independent role-playing system developed by a group of Native American designers that focused on their folklore and tried to reflect that in the mechanics as well. Yeah, I think, I mean, gaming, there's a lot of literature, maybe Sarah knows, on gaming as education. So if there are ways of incorporating, you know, cultures into D&D or these games, that's a way for the next generation to learn about those cultures as well. Can't remember, John can't remember the name of the system. So think of, so like Afrofuturism as in like Wakanda, right? From Black Panther, kind of. That's more of like a general, hopefully most of you know Black Panther and Wakanda, but it's that joining of the African diaspora with like technology. Swordfall is one of the big RPGs in the Afrofuturism space, yeah. The things are changing slowly. And I think that in the community engagement, right? The people, you homebring your own content is what's going to help force those changes as well. Cyberpunk RPG system that has recently been adapted to the video game format was designed by a Black author. Well, thank you all for joining. I'll stick around for a little bit longer if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, we're about 10 minutes early. So I hope you check out some of the different things I introduced to you. Let me know if you have any questions. My email is there on the slide. Sarah's posted the MSU museum exhibit about Afrofuturism.
Well, before we depart, shall we give Kelsey a virtual round of applause? Thank you so much, Kelsey. This was really thought-provoking and interesting. And for those of you that are perhaps new to the idea of D&D, there are a couple of different game stores in town, and I would encourage you to reach out to either of them. The Game Preserve is now in College Mall, and the Common Room is conveniently located near Jiffy Treat. And both of these businesses are more than happy to answer questions, and some of them even provide gaming groups that you can join. So go forth and adventure. Thank you all.